tonight we have Alison Young, the Blissful Hiker, who's going to be talking about her latest adventure, where she made a last minute decision to walk the entire Pacific Crest Trail from north to south after she lost her job. And she had a lot of good luck and also demonstrated a lot of pluck in doing this, and was fortunate to be able to avoid natural hazards and get just the right amount of solitude and togetherness, and really enjoy this through hike. Alison's backpacked and hiked all over the world. You probably remember a couple of years ago when she talked about hiking in New Zealand, and she's been most recently on the Continental Divide Trail, and at the time that I was writing this was on the Cape Wrath Trail in Scotland. So we're really excited to have Alison back, and I'll turn it over to you, Alison.
And you can see me. Hi. Hello. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? I'm going to take, let's see how I do this. This will take 2 seconds. I share my screen, do the desktop, go here. I tend to talk to myself while I do things. And oops, what did I do? Share and start. There it goes.
You can see it.
Da-da-da. Thank you so much, Fran, and thanks everybody for being here. It's so great to come and talk to the rovers, and I know you guys are so experienced with hiking that it makes me a little nervous to talk about what I did very last minute. Exactly as Fran said, I lost my job at NPR, and my husband said, "You are 100% boss free. Go right now." So that was kind of the pluck part. The luck part was that 2019 was a year where there were really no problems at all, no fires. And if you've read anything about this summer, a lot of the trail was closed, especially the national forests. All of the national forests in California were closed because of fire. So this was an amazing year. I'm called the Blissful Hiker, which is a bit of a joke because hiking is not always blissful, as you may know. Little bit about the Pacific Crest Trail. It is 2,650 miles long, plus 31 if you go south. It spans California, Oregon, and Washington. And it covers 26 national forests, 7 national parks, 5 state parks, and 33 wilderness areas. That picture is Jefferson Mountain State Natural Area in Oregon. Doesn't that look fake? It looks like a backdrop, like I'm not really standing there, but it's for real. The thru-hiker numbers is about 800 attempts a year, 800 to 1,000. And they don't really know for sure. It varies so much, 15 to 35% finish. I think more finished in my summer. Nobos going north, northbounders start in around mid-April, and southbounders start in early July. Now, the reason you have extra miles is because it's illegal to enter the United States on the PCT. So you have to hike from Harts Pass, 31 miles north, and then 31 miles back, touch the top. It takes about 5 months to walk. That averages 20 miles a day. That means even if you take days off, called zeros, you're still averaging 20 miles. So sometimes you're going much more than that. It covers 7 ecozones: alpine tundra, subalpine forest, upper montane forest, lower montane forest, upper Sonora, which is what that picture is, in the Angeles forest in Southern California, and lower Sonora. And there are 57 passes. The highest is 13,200 feet at Forester Pass on the John Muir Trail. This picture happens to be in the Emigrant Wilderness, and it's a shared trail, an equestrian trail. I started in Washington. 504 miles of the trail is in Washington. And as I mentioned, you have to go 31 miles north. What was really lucky for me was that I met trail angels right at the beginning who took us up from Bellingham to Harts Pass. Look at this day. This is day 1 of the PCT. And you can imagine when you do a hike, you always want a beautiful day on the first day. And even when I was in Scotland, it started raining. So you got in kind of a bad mood when you had to sleep in rain that first night. Gorgeous day on the first day. That's the very beginning of the trail up at Harts Pass going north. That's day 2. I had a lot of days like this in the beginning in Washington because the North Cascades are the wettest of the entire trail, and probably the wettest in the United States. They lie in a storm track. Apparently there's 750 perennial snowfields in the North Cascades. That's half of all of the snow in the lower 48, which doesn't surprise me at all, because most days were like that, but you can see it's warm. But I was pretty much hiking all in rain gear. You pass through the Pasayten Wilderness, North Cascades National Park, Lake Shellen recreational area, Glacier Peak Wilderness, Alpine Lakes and Henry M. Jackson wildernesses, and finally Goats Rock. And one thing about Washington, if you start this way, which I started on July 1st, is that you have very, very hard hiking. I mean, I hiked from the bottom there all the way up to the spot, and then I had to go back down again and then hiked over something again. But you never go higher than 7,000 feet. So you don't have any altitude issues, but you have sometimes kind of camping issues. You really need to be ready to roll. There's no warm up. And sometimes you have to just camp where you camp. Actually, that was a really comfortable night, but my tent looks like it's about to cave in. And you pretty much will have snow. It's hard to decide when to go. The only reason I chose July 1st is because these trail angels who I found on Facebook said that they were taking this whole group up to Hart's Pass. And part of the reason they were taking such a big group is because for people who were going north that year, the Sierra had a huge amount of snow. So a lot of people did what you call flipping. They went from the Sierra and they went to Washington. I mean, they had to get up there by bus. And then they met them. So there's like 50 of us starting on the first day. But July 1st was perfect, because if you start any sooner than that, some of these snowfields, I mean, wasn't a particularly dangerous one, but some of these snowfields can be completely covered in snow and be quite dangerous. Any later, and you really have to rush. Here is a sample of what it was looking like for me when I was there. See how steep that is. I mean, the trail is pretty good. I didn't feel like I was going to fall. I mean, it does feel a little bit like you're flying, but it's really steep. And if that was covered with snow, you can imagine you'd want your ice axe out and your crampons on, which I carried for about the first 2 weeks. But it got warm really, really fast. I had about 2 weeks, as I said, of rain and mist, and then it was sunny and hot. And I do want you to see, notice this gal who is a friend of mine, how small her backpack is. Like my backpack wasn't quite that small, but through hikers really do learn to just pare down their equipment to practically nothing, to the absolute basic that you need. I think she had rain gear. She may have had one warm coat and then her tiny, tiny tent and a sleeping bag and whatever she ate, that was it. What am I here? There we go. Lots and lots of steep climbs, but always good trail. Interesting to me that the Pacific Crest Trail, the idea was proposed by a woman. Her name was Catherine Montgomery, and she introduced it in 1926, the idea of a long trail. But the person that gets credit for it is Clinton Clark, who ended up being the promoter of the trail. And it was actually built originally, was joining several trails. In Washington, the Cascade Crest Trail, I don't even think they call it that anymore. The Oregon Skyline Trail in Oregon still called that Lava Crest Trail. Northern California, there's a Tahoe to Yosemite Trail, John Muir Trail, which is really quite famous, begun at the early part of the 20th century, and the Desert Crest Trail in Southern California. All of these were joined together, and they were mostly used with pack animals. So yes, it's a hard trail to do, but primarily you have these beautiful, easy to walk ramps. Unless you decide to go off-road, which I did here at Old Snowy at Goat Rocks. That's Mount St. Helens you're looking at there. And then I'm coming around to Mount Rainier. This is one of the most beautiful parts of Washington. And most people just want to get through fast, I think. I think I come right back around to Mount Jefferson. People want to go fast when they're through hiking. And why do they do that? Because you are operating on limited time. I mean, you're always thinking to yourself, I have to get through the Sierra by October 1st. That's kind of the date that's in your mind. So you're back here in July and you're thinking, oh, that's no big deal. I'll make it there. But you have, 1,500 miles to walk before you get there, 1,600 miles, I think, before you get there. So it's a long, long way and you can't dilly-dally. So sometimes people just have to get their head down, they put their earphones on and they just cruise. For me, I couldn't do that because I'm in my 50s, but also I wanted to see things. And Old Snowy was just spectacular in Goat Rocks. And it also kept me out of dangerous snowfields because I didn't have to walk on those snowfields that you're seeing here. I simply went over them. When I got to the other side, I think I said Mount Jefferson, I meant Mount Adams. Mount Adams is the one we were looking at from Goat Rocks. This is right on the flanks of Mount Adams. I mean, look at that sunset. It was just this kind of light. It's chilly. I mean, my friend that I'm with there is wearing shorts, but, wearing hats and coats. But basically just absolutely gorgeous. And this is the one golden opportunity before the mosquitoes come. But the other thing that comes when the mosquitoes come and the snow melts are wildflowers. I mean, look at that. It was like a waterfall of lupin. I couldn't even get a photograph to show how intense it was. And part of this was because I was in a burn area. So it was just completely flooded with them. But the flowers were unbelievable. Mountain paintbrush everywhere. I think this is elephant's head. You can see their little tiny elephant faces. Tons of avalanche lily in white and yellow. These I found especially gorgeous. Western pasque flower. And this is alpine aster. Note the droplets, and there's sun shining on them. It's really good idea if you're in northern Washington to wear rain pants because it's like a car wash every single day. You'll be soaked, and also you can get quite cold. And this is probably the most extraordinary part of being in Washington. Yes, the views are great, but also the sound in the forest. So can you hear that? It's a white-tailed ptarmigan. That's a varied thrush, pine siskin. That's a king bolete mushroom. Engelmann spruce. And the sound you're hearing going, it's a varied thrush. You hear that every day. A little bit of cedar waxwing and hermit thrush. That tune-toned whistle, that varied thrush, is one of my absolute favorites. Got Douglas fir that always look like they're dancing. Their arms coming out like this. That's me hiking there. Western larch, subalpine fir. I mean, just absolutely beautiful, beautiful trees and birds around you all the time in the spring. Some of the problems though, wet feet, really, really dangerous because actually it starts to burn your feet in a certain way and you get sometimes blisters on the bottom. So I started wearing sock liners, which really, really helped, especially when I was in Scotland just now. I wore sock liners and that made a huge difference. The bugs, the instant that the snow is gone, the bugs hatch and it is a nightmare. These gals are actually wearing something that's on their hammock, the little piece that comes over their hammock. They just wore it while they were hiking. And then what to do with your mountaineering gear. I had an extra long ice axe and sent it home. I had to send my other gear home, and then it was just so hot. After that, it was like a completely different ecosystem. And then I was in Oregon. You cross the Bridge of the Gods. 455 miles in Oregon. It's kind of considered flat and easier and boring. I hate it that people say that because I thought it was absolutely glorious in Oregon. There is a tradition by PCT hikers to walk it in 2 weeks. That's 31 miles a day. I did not do that, but I walked it pretty fast. There's also another tradition to not wash yourself the entire time you're in Oregon. Now, I met these guys about halfway through, and they were just, it was like I don't know, some sort of challenge. It was bizarre. Like they didn't even wash their hands. I don't know what their problem was. But I found Oregon amazing. Yes, there was lots of steep hills, but it's not quite, it's sort of spread out more. Lots of volcanoes. This is walking up the side of Mount Hood. This is Mount Jefferson with these glorious white bark pines that was just lay there, even when they were dead, they were beautiful for 100 years or something. You have the Three Sisters Wilderness. This is the view from my tent, believe it or not, absolutely glorious. Diamond Peak there over lava rocks is just a gal I met. A very typical look in Oregon to have an umbrella on your head because you're just exposed the whole time. And actually that's one of the things about Oregon and about the PCT is how much exposure you have. That's the three-finger jack that I'm looking at. And you feel like you're on a moonscape here with all of that pumice and lava rock around. If you don't have rain, you are out in the sun all day long. I've taken to wearing long pants now, long sleeve shirts, gloves. I mean, I just took my hat off for the picture here. This is at Crater Lake. This PCT actually doesn't go around Crater Lake. It misses it. So that's an extra addition if you want to put that on it. And I remember a lot of PCT hikers complaining, oh, it's slowing me down. One of the most beautiful natural phenomenon in the world is Crater Lake in central Oregon. Easy walking on spectacularly well-maintained trail. I saw a lot of trail managers making these gorgeous trails. Also burn areas, a lot of burn in Oregon. But it was beautiful as the forest was regenerating. There was something gorgeous and beguiling about it. And also really interesting rock. This is in the Three Sisters, and a gal came up to me and said, where do you find the obsidian? I said, don't you mean obsidian? And she turned bright red. And I said, it's okay, I won't tell anyone, except of course I'm telling you guys. But anyway, lots of obsidian on the ground in the Three Sisters area. And beautiful flowers. This is sneezeweed, part of the aster family, and just forest filled, or I should say meadows filled with flowers and bees and everybody doing their work there. Not too many storms, but I had this really interesting walk going toward the Three-Finger Jack. Again, this is near Three Sisters in Central Oregon. And you can see that you have hills, but they're not that hard. I mean, yeah, it looks like you'd have to go way down, but you kind of stayed on a ridge and walked over it. Some of the problems in Oregon were that I started to meet more trail angels. That wasn't a problem, but I really, really needed trail angels. There were long sections where you couldn't really stop. You'd have to get a bus or hitchhike out to go to Bend or to go to Eugene or other places. You'd hit a lot of resorts that often would hold your food for you. You could send food ahead, but it was really nice to see something like this where you could sit down and have a soda. Water became a huge issue, and trail angels were unbelievable. I mean, look at the amount of water that they supplied us with, and people would just, you would just fill your water bottles, and you knew you had to go 25 miles after that or something to the next water source. Also, they would put up signs to tell you when you can trust the water and when you can't. And I think maybe I mentioned this earlier, the biggest issue was the devastating fire damage. It was hot, and it was dusty, and sometimes it was not beautiful at all. It was just sorrowful. I also was dirty all the time in Oregon. I mean, anytime I would find a stream, I was swimming in it, but it would take 2 minutes and I would just be filthy. And I started to develop this weird toe issue too, because my toes are getting all arthritic. So they were kind of pushed together. But Oregon was quick, and then I was in California. And of course, when you think that this place is only 3 states, you're like, I'm almost there. Well, California is 1,692 miles of the PCT. So the best way to manage dealing with this is to divide it up into 3 states: Northern California, the Sierra, and the desert. And actually, I changed my clothes here. I found this man's shirt at the border. It was $1. And it worked really great. It's like a chambray shirt. And so I wore that pretty much the whole time until I got to the Sierra. About 500 miles is Northern California. You start really, really dry. And all of it is what we call balcony walks, where you're just, this entire walk, you walk around that U-shaped canyon, and you just are seeing it the entire time, barely ever inside the forest. You go through the Trinity Alps, Castle Crags, Siskiyou Mountains, Marble Mountain Wilderness, Hat Creek Rim, lots and lots of beautiful, beautiful places. This is a view from my tent, a sunset near Sayed Valley. And then that was one of the only bit of road walking almost the entire trail. Again, here is what the balcony walks look like. And they've really made a beautiful job of building stairs here in the Marble Mountain Wilderness. I loved Northern California, but that was because I was heading toward the Sierra. Sometimes when people leave the Sierra, they find this absolutely exhausting to be in Northern California because it seems to go on forever. It is on an entire state. It's as big as Washington and as big as Oregon. And the first time you see Mount Shasta, which you can see behind me in this picture, I actually camped at that spot. I found a little flat spot there. You see Mount Shasta for 2 solid weeks, and you think I'm not even moving. And that's because you circle all the way around it. I found it beautiful. I found it exciting to head towards the Sierra rather than away from it. This is near the Trinity Alps and Castle Crag. And again, the view from my tent, just spectacular sunsets, spectacular views, but more subtle in some ways than the extreme mountains in Washington or in the Sierra that's coming up. This is Burney Falls. Whoa, it's really loud. Sorry. And this is, again, a lot of PCT hikers just bomb around this and don't even go in. I mean, look at this incredible, after all of that dryness, you get to this unbelievable falls, which takes you directly to the Hat Creek Rim. And you're in incredibly dry area where you have to carry a lot of water. You start to get used to what it feels like to carry water. And you have interesting campsite friends because it's free range cattle and free range rattlesnakes too. I'm not that close to it. I think I blew up this picture, but I passed by him and he just leapt out at me like spitting, and it was terrifying. I was pretty far away though. You also go through Lassen Volcanic National Park, the very last of the volcanoes as you're going in the Cascades. That's from my campsite. Again, I had spectacular campsites on the PCT. And I found Lassen really interesting. It's beautiful. It's more subtle in some ways. Lots of hot springs to swim in, and it was and lakes as well that were glorious. But I had fun. It goes on and on, so you have to entertain yourself, like putting a sugar pine cone up to your eyeballs, or making faces at Terminal Geyser in Lassen, or going where a lot of PCT hikers don't go, to the Middle Fork Feather River. It's a spectacular rapids, and you can see I put my head under. I think I didn't go all the way on the rapids, but I'm swimming somewhere near it. A place where they have the smooth rocks that are kind of drilling out these holes. It was spectacular place, again, very far north in California near Shasta. Odd places that you have to get water, and long days between water sources. So this is near Sierra City, and it was my first and only of my life 30-mile day from water source to water source. And I'm really glad I did one. I saw what it felt like. It was hard. It was a long day, even though it was in August. So the days were still pretty long, but I did have to hike from sunup to sundown, and I don't think I'm going to be doing that again. And then I arrive in the Sierra. I mean, look how things start to change. I'm near Truckee, California here. It's about 500 miles in the Sierra, and people don't say that this is actually absolutely where it starts, but it's approximately there. But you're starting to see a lot of granite and just gorgeous, trees and views. This is Donner Pass, where the Donner family was trapped in the winter. And now they make a lot of jokes about it in Truckee, California, but you can see the road there. And after you leave Donner, you go to Desolation Wilderness. This is the view from my tent. And it was, I think, the last day of that lazy summer feeling. I'm starting to get kind of a pressure. Northern California was hard. It was long, and I'm starting to get kind of like, I got to get into the big Sierra, the high mountains, where you're starting to have high altitude, and where the snows could come. It could be quite dangerous. And so I'm starting to think, okay, I got to get to the Sierra by October 1st before it snows. Well, it went ahead and snowed before. Things started to get really interesting when I got to the Emigrant Wilderness. This is above Sonora Pass. And this is just about the time I started to carry my bear canister. A really, really beautiful day, but 10 miles of total exposure up there in the mountains. It was cold, and it just had that kind of threatening feeling. You started to really focus on your hiking. I got over that just fine. This does not look warm right now, especially with winter coming on. It was damp. I was told by someone, I knew the snow was coming, that I should fill up on water before it came, which I did. I just filled up every container I had just with the stream water. I didn't even filter it and just carried it. And then I ended up having to dry camp, which I'm sure a lot of you know what that means, to camp without any stream nearby. And then once the snow stopped, I could pump the water. But that was like, okay, I'm getting nervous now. But it was really, really beautiful to enter Yosemite National Park. You're in it for 3 days, and a a portion of it that a lot of people don't go to. I mean, it was really unusual. The only hikers that I saw there were PCT hikers, huge climbs, going way up over passes and way deep down to river sources. You had plenty of water, so you never had to worry about that. But a place where they started building stairs to avoid erosion, and a lot of the rock was carved into to make it easier to walk through. But I found it absolutely spectacular. Again, here's another white bark pine that I thought was really quite beautiful view from my tent. You join the John Muir Trail at Tuolumne Meadows. You don't do the part that's in the valley. I mean, I suppose you could go there if you wanted to, but you come down into Tuolumne Meadows and then walk through Lyle Canyon. If any of you have done the John Muir Trail, it was thrilling. This is the second time I've done it. And I went to Donahue Pass. You can see that my backpack looks giant. And that's because I had this idea. This is where some of the pluck comes in, that I did not want to come out of the Sierra to resupply. I wanted to just go straight through it. It's about 300 miles. And my plan was, there's two places that you can get food inside the trail, at the Vermilion Valley Ranch and at Muir Ranch, or Vermilion Valley Resort. But maybe not maybe about 250 miles, I think would probably be about right. But I was being a little bit crazy to do that. I'm packed up here with a bear canister inside there and as much food as I can cram in. This is the first large high pass I did, 11,000 feet at Donahue Pass. There's 7 passes on the John Muir Trail. This is Thousand Island Lake. It was this glorious morning. I kind of just walked past it because I was moving really fast, and I left here to hitch into Mammoth. I actually didn't even get any food when I went to Mammoth, but the reason I went there is because it was getting so cold that I sent this emergency message to my husband via my GPS and said, you have to send my warm sleeping bag right now to Mammoth. I'm going to be there in 3 days. Send it overnight, whatever. And so I went to Devil's Postpile and met some people that were in a camper, and they took me out. It's like 20 miles out. It's really far. They took me in this camper and we were just laughing and having a good time the whole way. And then somehow there was a bus still running, not back to where I went to a different place that took me back in. And I had a warmer sleeping bag. But then I would pick up food. This is at the VVR, the Vermilion Valley Resort, which you have to take a boat to. It's a little complicated. But they had a hiker box, and I was, eating up my food, and then I just loaded right back up with more food. And the reason there's hiker boxes is because people send themselves food and tend to send themselves too much because they think they need more than they really eat. So then they get there and they say, I don't want to carry 10 pounds of food. I only want to carry 5. So they leave 5 pounds of food in the food locker in the hiker box. And it ends up being great stuff. You get these Mountain House meals and candy and all kinds of good things. So I just jammed them in. And the way you jam things into a bear box is you stand on it and push it in as hard as you can. You don't try to be gentle. You just get as much as you can in there. And then it went right back out, climbed up to Selden Pass. But before I look how beautiful it is. Sierra is probably the most beautiful place ever in the world. And definitely the PCT. Before I got there, I met some trail workers who invited me to come and eat with them. And they had like fresh salad. And I should mention that when I got to the VVR, it was so late in the season. It was September. They were basically closed. They didn't have any food to feed you. They just had like a little store to buy candy and chips. It wasn't anything really fancy. So when I met these trail workers who fed me salad, and they said, we have way too much food. I mean, I was gaining weight in the Sierra, but I had to walk fast. This is Evolution Valley, one of the most extraordinary places, an area named for Darwin. And all of the peaks have names of important evolutionary scientists because this is the time when they were mapping this, the US Geological Survey, when Darwinism was becoming an accepted theory. This is Muir Pass, one of the 7 passes I mentioned to you. It's absolutely thrilling to climb up into what Muir called the range of light. It's 17 miles of exposure, so it can be extremely dangerous. And that's why they've built a hut at the top And then there's an equally rocky, long descent. And I knew rain and serious weather was coming in. So this is leaving for the next pass. And I knew, you can see it, like you can see the weather's really changing. And I had a choice. I could have left for Bishop here. There's a pass that goes to Bishop. But I kept going. I had enough food. I was going to move. And I'm going up the golden staircase, and you can see it coming. I first got rain, and then I got hail, and then I got snow, and then I got clear skies. But I had extremely cold temperatures. Even in the day, just to sit down was very chilly. So you're moving quickly, enjoying it, but and see the beautiful colors. I mean, this is fall. But then snow came that night, and these lovely people, I was like, oh, there's just a lake just past here. I've camped there before. And they said, I think you shouldn't go up any higher. Stay with us. And I was really glad I did. A whole group of PCT hikers camped together because it was just kind of scary, actually, at that point. But still stayed clear. This is at Pinchot Pass. You can see all of the snow below. It's not icy, but it's snowy and it's cold. And you literally had to run down these passes because the wind was so intense. It was blowing like in your mouth. Can my view from my tent again, gorgeous Ray Lakes, but it got down into the teens. And I don't think I'm looking that warm up here. This is finally Forester Pass, the highest. And I got there before October 1st, I think the last day of September. And then I knew from there on out, you still had Sierra to hike, and you still had high passes. You still got up to about 11,000 feet, but it was more in the trees. And so the danger of having snowfields or, being unable to cross something because of really dangerous drops really disappeared. But then you started to walk into the Foxtail Pines, which I found absolutely gorgeous. I did skip Mount Whitney. A lot of PCT hikers climb Whitney. From there, it's the highest mountain in the lower 48 states. It's a 14er. But I've done it twice, so I skipped it, and I was really getting cold, and I kind of had enough. So I was just entranced. Look at these gorgeous trees. I probably have 500 pictures of them, but this is just a taste of the Foxtail Pines in the Sierra. Some of the problems in the Sierra was it was really, really getting cold. You could barely breathe. Extremely steep, and at high altitude, steep even stairs that they had to build to get through the Sierra. And you had visitors too. I carried a bear box. You don't have to carry bear spray at this point. It's, black bears, they're pretty safe, but you do want to keep them out of your campsite. I mostly saw them walking past. And then I was in the desert. Kennedy Meadows South, or Walker Pass, marks the beginning of the desert. It's 700 miles now to Mexico. And the desert is absolutely spectacular, but it is not flat. Look at that. This is the Tehachapi Mountains. Just glorious. And you can see now I'm really starting to get pretty angled sun. It's getting later in the season. It's the beginning of October. And it is not warm, but I preferred this. I think this is a better time to hike in the desert, to come south and hike in October, rather than going north and hiking in April or May, when it really can start to get hot. This is near Idlewild, one of the most glorious places to walk, because you're on this balcony walk, like you're flying above the desert. It's so far below you. And in the Mojave Desert, this is a portion of it where you cross the San Andreas Fault 3 times. I never felt any shaking though. And you have a lot of Joshua trees. They're part of the Yucca family and are named because they looked like the prophet Joshua. And they're everywhere, and they're interesting. They fall away in interesting ways and make these strange shapes. But a lot of people, this is somebody I met in Washington and I hadn't seen in months. And then I ran into her. A lot of people start to really lose steam in the desert, but I found it absolutely incredible. I was pretty much always dirty in the desert because all my camps were dry camps where you had to carry water to a place that you could sleep, because you couldn't sleep next to the water because it was not conducive to setting a tent. This is the windmills near Tehachapi. I found quite interesting, and the shadows would go around like they were chopping my head off. It was just really kind of fun. You actually walk on the Los Angeles Aqueduct, And this is the last water for miles of that. I made sure I walked the entire aqueduct in a day. Very easy to do in the fall because it's very sunny, but it's cool. But you need to fill up, you camel up by drinking like maybe an entire quart or 2 quarts before, 2 liters or whatever, before you start walking. And you're basically on concrete most of the way. It's the last water to this place, weird places in Southern California. Southern California is really kind of creepy in some ways. This odd movie set of tiny buildings right on Highway 138 that invited us hikers to come, and you'd have like individual little houses that you slept in. And someone warned me that under my bed, there was a black widow spider. And sure enough, there was. The black widow spider stayed right where it was. And I just slept in my bed and tried to pretend it wasn't there. And I lived to tell the tale. You also had these unbelievable places. This is a view from one of my campsites where I started to become a cowgirl camper, sleeping without my tent, sleeping out because it was too cold for any creatures to come in. You can enjoy the view, you can see the stars. And you also just had to be very careful, keep a very clean campsite so no bears would come into your site, but usually they don't travel at night anyway. You had other weird things, like I had a campsite tucked into the rocks here at Cajon Pass. That's between the San Bernardino and San Gabriel Mountains. It's 3,700 feet high. So you see for miles, like the highway going up this, and this is the train going in these long loops to get over it. That was a very weird, interesting place that the PCT passes through. You have some road walk to do, and you had these very unusual riparian canyons. You can see the color from this view, and you knew that when you were going in, you were going to have running water and oak trees. And I was there in autumn, and things were absolutely brilliantly colored. It was such a shock for me. I expected the desert to be one thing. I expected it to be flat. It's not flat at all. And I expected it to be all cactus, but you had absolutely brilliant oak trees and just interesting plants as well. 3 different colors of, I found these little guys fascinating, little acorns. Little cholla cactus. You did have cactus to walk through a lot of this. You needed to be very careful where you put your feet and legs. And barrel cactus. This is in Anza, closer to San Diego, closer to the end. And you also have interesting creatures, even in winter, because they would come out, or in fall, they would come out in the sun. This is an alligator lizard who was kind of looking at me and saying, back off. Lots of pinnacate beetles everywhere. This guy was really strange, a Jerusalem cricket. I mean, he looked fierce, but I think he's just kind of harmless. Also harmless, but kind of spooky, tarantulas. And these are definitely not harmless. I was walking with a friend at this point who stepped over him thinking it was a stick. And I was behind my friend, and immediately the snake got into a rattling position. Again, I was far enough away, he couldn't strike me, but he was in position. So you do want to watch out for them. They are everywhere across. I was just amazed at the number of them across the trail, just trying to warm up. But they're pretty harmless, and you can take your hiking stick and just gently, knock the ground, and they'll just slither away. I mentioned that I did a lot of cowgirl camping. It's one of my favorite little spots. It was too cold for any kind of creatures to come out at all. I did see bear, as I mentioned. Did not see a mountain lion, but was pretty sure I was stalked by one in a canyon. Just had this feeling he was watching me. They're usually just pretty curious, and you just want to look really tall and big and sure of yourself and not anything worth being prey, and definitely never run. They won't come after you if you don't do that. This is near Palm Springs. As I mentioned that it's not flat in the desert. And surprisingly, this is the highest from bottom to top of the entire PCT, climbing San Jacinto Peak or San Jacinto Peak. And it's a real challenge because it's 10,000 feet of climbing from the last water source, which was provided by the city of Los Angeles, and 20 miles up to a stream. It was a frozen stream at that point. And so I was hiking with my friend at this point, and we filled up 4 liters each and just made a plan. Every 5 miles, we drank a liter. And we made it. We got to our spot. It was frozen, but we could still, we still had some running water. We're able to get water. And this is San Jacinto Peak. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you're basically looking down at the highway. They're going to Palm Springs and into the desert and over towards Idlewild. But it was like you were in an airplane. It was a glorious, glorious hike. And then I'm almost there. I loved seeing the sign. This was my last day, the last place I hiked. And the terminus of the PCT is Campo, California. A couple of the hard things for Southern California or the desert is it was much harder than you'd expect. It was cold, and water was always an issue. You had interesting places where you got water, like Mike's place. It was a guy who lived in the desert and set up this area for us to camp in and stored water for us that we could just take right out of it. It was already filtered. Sometimes these odd cisterns that you gathered water from, this lovely younger hiker than me was willing to sort of throw his body inside there and get it. A water cache from just amazing trail angels. You never met them. They just did this for people. I think really they have we put a donation in their little donation bin, but basically did it because they wanted to be a part of it. Sometimes you just had to ask someone, hey, you don't happen to have a little extra water? And they were happy to help out. And then you had these odd places. I'm climbing down to a weird little stream that was off trail where I filtered water. And in this case, it was probably the only time that I took my bandana and poured the water through it to filter it because it was so filled with just grit and gook. And sometimes people just left you on the side of the road where you didn't really expect it, a cooler with water in it. And they were just kind of trusting that you wouldn't take them all or you wouldn't vandalize it. A really lovely sharing kind of community there in the PCT. And then it was over. And let me tell you something, that's not water in my glass. My husband brought me real tequila and real ice cubes for the picture at the border. And you can see the razor wire. I'm at Mexico. So now I'd like to open it up for questions. I think I went through everything.
How heavy was your pack?
How heavy was my pack? So I keep a base weight of around 13 pounds.
Oh.
And I think the heaviest thing is I actually take a fairly heavy battery because I use a phone and a GPS. And because I gather like sounds for my podcast. And I also, take a lot of pictures and I write my blog, and it all takes a lot of power. So I think my battery ends up being the heaviest thing. And I've taken now to not taking a stove. So I don't cook anymore. I did in Scotland because I was with someone. So we shared it and it was cold. So you really wanted a stove. But on the CDT, I didn't cook. I did everything cold soak. So that really lightens your load too. And for those of you who don't know what packed weight means, it's without water or food, just the things that don't change in weight, and you don't count like the things you wear or like your hiking poles, that kind of thing. Anything else? Anything you guys want to know about the PCT? I think it's something you don't have to do all at once. I interviewed. Huh?
What kind of characters did you see on the trail?
Oh, characters. Oh, that's great. I didn't take too many pictures of the characters. I mean, I did take a lot of pictures, but I didn't share them with you. There was a guy from Switzerland who on Halloween wore a tutu as he was hiking. And that was pretty much like his whole style of hiking. There was a gal who was she called herself Grapefruit Punk. And so people had interesting names, and she wore a dress the whole way, which I found, I don't know if that was really very much being a character, but it was pretty funny because, all of us are really concerned about, making sure we're having like hiking gear, hiking pants and all this kind of stuff. But she, got something I think she actually sewed it. And then, people have things from like thrift stores. So there was a lot of like people being stylish. And people, I didn't show a picture of this because it was just another trail angel thing, but it was a great experience in Oregon where you kind of came around a corner and people were just sitting there drinking. And I was like, oh, hi. And they're like, you want to sit down? And I thought, sure. And I went, oh my God, you're trail angels. And it was, maybe 8 a.m. and they had booze for all of us. So we were, and when you're through hiking, it doesn't matter. You're hungry and thirsty all the time. It makes no difference. You're going to burn it off. So we were all having, and there was like nice cocktails. It wasn't like a beer. It was really good liquor. And so we were getting a little bit silly. And there was a guy in the group. He was actually coming north. So it was the only time I met him. And then we were passing. But he said he wasn't carrying a tent at all, like ever. And so he was sleeping out with the bugs, with the rain, with everything. I'm not even sure how he managed it, but he seemed to be pretty happy, although that may have been the booze. Who knows?
Hey, Allison.
Yeah.
So
Hey, you mentioned that you were on the John Muir Trail before. I know you were.
This is my brother, by the way.
Hello, guys. Great club, by the way. How much of the PCT overlaps with the John Muir Trail that you walked on this trip?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So what happens is it's 211 miles, I think. You meet the John Muir Trail in Tuolumne Meadows. And for those of you who've ever walked it or been to Yosemite, the John Muir Trail actually starts in Yosemite Valley. So it goes up the Vernal Falls Mist Trail area. I mean, the official trail goes around it, but you can go up Vernal Falls, Nevada Falls, up that area. And then you go over the cathedral and come down to Tuolumne Meadows. But I come in a different way on the PCT. And then there's a place at Thousand Island Lake where you have a choice. You can do the PCT or the John Muir Trail. And I liked the PCT better because you were going up really high into the kind of the high route of the Sierra, and you had more views of, the huge mountains from there. And you cut off at Whitney. So the John Muir Trail would go over the pass and climb Whitney, and that would be the end, and come down into Lone Pine. But the PCT continues past there, heading south.
What was it, a different season that you did the John Muir Trail?
Yes.
You in a way.
Yes, I did the John Muir Trail in the first time in late August into September, which is a great time to do it because you have no bugs and you still have really warm temperatures. It was shorts, pretty, nice. And you have a little bit longer days. This time it was a month later and much shorter days. So you really have to hike fast, and it was much colder. I was going faster because I was strong, but I was going faster too because I was cold. But it was beautiful. It still had just, gorgeous colors. And I would say if you haven't ever been on a hike in California and you want to do a significant one, it's 230 miles, I think it is. The John Muir Trail is one of the best in the world.
Oh, and by the way, you have 16 questions in the chat box.
Oh, I
was watching them come in. They're great questions. You might want to just tick them off.
Is David O Sullivan still a topic of conversation in Idlewild? Don't know who that is. Who asked that? I don't know who David O Sullivan is. I will go on with questions. What things did you find to multi-use? Bandanas, pots, clothes items. That's a great question. I think one of the things you do when you backpack, when you do anything that's long distance, is you want to make sure you're carrying the least amount of gear that you can. I had 2 bandanas tied to my backpack. One I used for drying pots and things like that, and one I used for drying me. But now I use a Kula cloth, which is a pea rag, and I don't really use anything to dry me. I just use my, like dry my pots or anything like that. I just let them air dry, or when I'm swimming or anything like that. I definitely take the smallest things I can. So now I only take a spoon, and I have my food in bags. I eat out of the bag. Oh, that sounds gross. What were your core foods? That's a really good question. Gummy bears and hot chocolate. No, I'm just kidding. My core foods tend to be You eat a lot of, this is what I've really gotten into lately, is making cereals that I have milk in and that I just pour water into. So that's what I have for breakfast. During the day, I make my own jerky. I actually do a lot of drying of food, so jerky, and I make my own bars. And dinner, I do things like a pasta dish. One of the things I've found that works extremely well if you do any of your own dehydrating are garbanzo beans. They are fantastic. You can take a can of garbanzo beans, put them on your dehydrator. They dry in like, I don't know, a couple of hours maybe at the most. They weigh like nothing. And then you have to rehydrate them. It takes about 25 minutes. Don't do them too long, don't do them too short. And then you can add stuff to them. Another thing that's really been useful are mayonnaise packages. I swear by them. It's a lot of fat. They seem to be just fine. I've had them out in heat. People say, oh, don't trust the heat, but they're in these metal packages. It does make a lot of garbage. But when you mix the mayonnaise with a little dill and a little dried onions and those garbanzo beans, it's super filling, and it's more nutritious, I think, than pasta. I tend to eat a ton of pasta, but pasta doesn't have a lot of vitamins in it, same way as beans. Yeah, so let's see. What do you use for navigation? I use the stars. No, I have taken a class in map making. So I do a CalToko map now, and I made a CalToko map of, do you guys know what CalToko is?
No.
It's a free software. You should definitely check it out, and I'll put it in the chat. I have to look up the address. CalToko is, oh, I don't know. It might cost like $25 or something now, but let me just put this address in. And it is a software where you can make your own maps. You can sometimes load a GPX track into it. So if you wanted to take someone else's route, you can load that in, make a map, figure out like where you're going to camp. You can even go off-road. Then you can load this into your phone and use it for navigation, which is what I did in Scotland. I ended up using Guthook too for, do you guys know what Guthook is? They've changed their name to Far Out. It's an app for navigation. The problem with that one is it tends to be only the route itself, so you're not seeing a lot outside of it. And when you make a CalToko map, you can have, see all of the roads, you can see towns, so you can make navigational choices. For instance, if a huge storm's coming in, you decide you really want to go into a town or you want to skip a section. Paper maps, yes, you're supposed to take them. I know that it's really important too. I'm going to put Gaia up here too. Gaia maps. Let me see if I can find this here. Gaia GPS is the other source I use, which I really love. And then Guthook, or it's called Far Out now. Far Out, I don't know what they call it, map. I don't know what they call it now. Far Out, outdoor, and that's Fat Map, sorry. You can probably find Far Out. It's, I don't know if that's right. Anyway, so there's all this big argument about whether you should take paper or not. I had Andrew Skirka. He's a National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, and he's hiked, I don't know, 50,000 miles or something crazy. He says you should always take paper maps, because when you're looking at a map on this, it's very hard to see the full scope. And also when you're making paper maps. So, you start to I usually use them as a backup. I print them and put them inside a plastic bag and just stuff them in my backpack. And then if I'm really in trouble, everything's fried, all of my electronics have gone to shit, I've been underwater, I can still take those out and I can still figure out where I am. Always take a compass. Compass is important too. How have you lightened up your base weight? I have an extremely lightweight backpack. I have extremely lightweight sleeping pad. I use and you guys, I should put this up too. I'm being an idiot. My website, blissfulhiker.com. If you go to blissfulhiker.com, you can see I don't think I have the HTTPS, if you go to my gear page, you can see my full listing of my gear, and you'll see that I use ultralight stuff. you know, an ultralight pad, a really light sleeping bag, really light backpack. The main things that what is it? So the backpack, the sleeping bag, and the tent. I use a Gossamer Gear the solo tent. I set that tent up with my trekking poles, so I'm not carrying any poles. Those are the main things that you really want to lighten up. I lighten up by not taking a cook stove. But then there are things that like I won't compromise on. My rain gear, I absolutely won't. I've hiked in New Zealand, I've hiked in Scotland. Let me tell you something. You want real rain gear. But even in Washington State, you want real rain gear because if you're going to be rained on all day long, it's really important. So those are some of the things I've done. So I have the updated gear list there. Let me just see if I can look at my gear list and see if there's anything I can tell you about in particular. It just comes to mind. Yeah, I use the Gossamer Gear, a lot of their stuff. And then little things like using a little tiny knife that you really don't have to have, like a multi-tool. Taking things in really small amounts. You know, you don't need to have an entirely huge first aid kit. You only need a couple of things that are really, really important to carry. I use a Sea to Summit long-handled spoon. That's one of my favorite things I own. I have a black diamond spot headlamp that weighs like practically nothing. I use a Ziploc for my wallet. That doesn't weigh anything. And as far as like what you wear, you tend to wear the same thing over and over again, but somebody told me a long time ago, and I've kind of sworn by this, when you get to camp, if you can change into something, you always feel better. And whatever that something is, for women, it's usually taking off your brassiere. For guys, it might be just like, I got to get out of these, you know, my undies, whatever it is. You want to put something cotton on, or you want to put something that's going to make you feel happy. But it should probably be something that if the shit really hit the fan and it was super cold and it was rainy and miserable, you could wear everything and you'd have enough layers. Let's see. Resupply is easy along the JMT, where resupply logistics different, more difficult on the PCT as they are along the JMT. I didn't think resupply was definitely easy along the JMT. You have to pay for it, for one thing. Depends on how fast you hike. Yeah, there were some resupply logistics going in the last days of the state of Washington. There wasn't a really easy place to resupply. You'd have to be hitchhiking out to a resort. So if you have experience and you kind of know how much food you eat per day and how much you can carry, you usually can make it. And like the longest I've gone is 9 days. That's a really big, well, I mean, I did the JMT, I did longer, or the JMT portion of the PCT, I did longer, but that's because I was getting food along the way. But this 9 days at the end, I just I figured out what I was going to eat. And then you have to be really careful that after the first or the second day, you don't say, I want all those gummy bears. I have to have all those gummy bears. I need them now. You have to just be disciplined and say, I'm only going to have this handful. And then tomorrow I will allow myself to have the second handful. So you do have to plan that and be disciplined. Somebody asked about shoes. I've gone through 8 pairs of La Sportiva Akira running shoes, trail runners. They're the best shoes I've ever worn. I'll never go back on that. So you can find those on my list too. La Sportiva is fantastic. It has a rubber sole that grips the rock, kind of like climbing shoes. So it has it's really strong. I would not ever recommend shoes that are waterproof, because once the water goes inside, you're going to start sloshing around and it's going to stay in there. Water's going to go inside your shoe no matter what. If you're on a hike, it's nearly impossible to cross a river without water going in your shoes. And you're probably not going to take off your shoes, because you'll never get anywhere if you keep taking off your shoes. Emergency communications device. I use the InReach, Garmin InReach Mini. I think I have it right here. It's my favorite. It's this big. Look how small that is. 3 ounces. I tie it to my body. I just tie it actually to my belt loop and then stick it in my pocket, so it's on me. So that if all hell broke loose and my backpack disappeared, it's on me, so I can set the SOS. And if any of you guys have been following me at blissfulhiker.com, I was helicoptered out of Montana last year. these really, really work. They're a two-way, so you can contact people at home. And my husband follows me. I say, I'm starting my trip, and then it tracks my movements. Every 2 hours, it sends a ping. And then I'm like, I'm stopping here. So he has this. This is really important. The most important part of it is the SOS. You can hook it up to your phone and you can see where you've gone. So if you have a problem where you've gone out and you need to come back, you can follow your breadcrumb. Are your feet okay now? Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
What percentage of hikers you encountered do you think carry an emergency communication device?
Oh, I would say almost everybody, especially people who are alone. People who are doing long distance trails usually always have a spot locator or some kind of, like Garmin usually is the standard. I would say 80% of people carry them. There is some people who out in the mountaineers in Washington State are a little bit against them because they're starting to feel that people are using them as a way to not back up their own skills. So if your skills are good enough, you shouldn't have to have a Garmin, right? Isn't that the point? You shouldn't have to be rescued. You should know how far you should go. You shouldn't be in charge of yourself. So there is a little bit of controversy about them. My feeling about it is that if you fall and hurt yourself, or in my case, have a heart condition, it would be better to be rescued before you got eaten by the bears. So that's just my feeling. Are your feet okay now? My toes started to look like yours. I don't think I have it with me. I bought in Los Angeles silicone toe separators, and I swear by them now. So basically it's my big toe is, it's getting arthritic and they're turning in on each other. So they were like going against each other, and it wasn't a blister. It was more of like a ingrown toenail. So once I put that silicone piece in there, it kept them apart. And that really, really helps. So I use that. I use insoles, the Super Feet that you can get at Midwest Mountaineering. And my feet are, they're as good as a 57-year-old's feet are going to be. Did you have boxes shipped ahead? This is a great question about resupply. A lot of people get super planning for their trip. And one of my advantages was that I didn't know it was until the last minute that I was going to do the PCT. I was just like, I'll go. I sent 2 resupplies ahead. And then I was like, well, what if I don't like it? Or what if I fail? Then I've only sent 2 resupplies and I can come home. So that was my thinking. And it actually turned out to be better because people who send stuff for the whole way, you don't know really how much food you need. You don't know what food you're really going to like. Unless you're so seasoned, you know exactly what you eat. And you can send food along the way. You hit towns, you take a break, and you buy enough food and you start separating it out. And you send, like I sent all of Oregon's food when I was in Washington, in Southern Washington. I just took a day, bought all my food, put it into boxes, boom, 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 and sent it ahead. When I got to California, it was the same thing. I made the plans as I went. And that is definitely a rule of thumb for most thru hikers. If you're doing something like the JMT, which is pretty hard to do on one carry, you probably would want to send it because there's not going to be any other opportunity to, but you can always have someone from home do it for you. So, if your mom or someone or a friend is at home, you can have the food ready to go and they can send it, because there are often rules in different places. They don't want to hold boxes for more than 2 weeks, or they don't want to hold boxes at all unless you pay them. So there's all kinds of different rules with that. A lot of that stuff's available on the website now, so you can find it. What month would you recommend doing the John Muir Trail? August, for sure. Late August is probably the best. Any other questions? I know I'm talking really.
Yeah, no, that's great, Alison. You talked about having a battery. So what battery is it? And did you have solar charger as well?
No, not a solar charger. The reason for that is because I don't trust solar chargers. I'm sure they've worked for some people, but I never know if the sun's going to shine enough. It did on the PCT, but I know for certain exactly how much power. This is is it RAV? It's a RAV power bank. So the size, I'm looking at my thing here, electronics. It's a RAV 22,000 mAh rechargeable battery. So it has 3 doohickeys here, and this is where you point everything. You charge it. It takes like overnight to fill it fully. So you usually end up charging it at, if you're coming out and even if you're not going to take a 0, but you're coming into town and you're just going to spend the night there, you can plug it in overnight in your hotel or at your trail angel's house or something. Oftentimes you'll come to a resort and they just allow you to plug it in, but this can take a lot of hours to charge. I know that this probably isn't the best way to do things. I have a iPhone Max 10 that actually just fried in Scotland because it got too wet, but it works. It just doesn't take very good pictures anymore. I know that this is not great advice and Apple says not to do this, but I charge it every night full. So I'll run it down in the day to maybe 75% and then I just charge it, So I never run it all the way down. And they say that that's not the best thing for the phone, but I use this in New Zealand and PCT and all the trails in between CDT. And I haven't, it seems to be working just fine. The main thing is it was as though I'd held it underwater because the rain was really, really bad in Scotland. So the pictures aren't good. But my system is these 2 things. And then I have like a little, I can't believe they're sitting right here, this little set. And so I sit there at night when I'm writing my blog, because I do a blog about, and that's actually another piece about this. I blog every single day on my trips. And if you ever want to blog, like a good rule of thumb is to do it every day, because if you wait a day, you're not going to remember anything and you can't, it's just not fresh. And I also write while I go. So if I see something or I talk to someone or I tape something, then when I sit down to do it, I can do it at night. And so it's sitting there like on my, sleeping bag and I'm like inside freezing and I just charge it right then. And usually it just charges right up. So that's kind of my little routine. I mean, I'm not crazy about, things. I mean, there are a couple of things you have to get very picky about when you backpack. You have to know where every single item is at all times. And you usually pack your bag the same way every time. And the reason you do that is because you get into situations where you forget things and you lose them. And if you're packing so carefully as I am, because I'm trying to keep it at low weight and you've listed every single item you have, if you lose your spoon, how are you going to eat? If you lose you're not going to lose your sleeping bag, but you could leave behind. I've left a bag of clothes behind. When I first started backpacking on the Superior Hiking Trail, it was a waterproof, compression sack, and it was green. I mean, who chooses green? It was green. And I put clothes in it and I set it down on grass. And then I just got up and walked away and I couldn't see it. But if you know where every little thing is, and you can also get to them quickly. So that if you have like a brain on the top of your bag, and that's where you keep, I don't know, in Scotland, I kept a cup because I was sharing with a friend. I kept a cup, my spoon, like my bandana. I mean, I had like the things I needed. And then my water's here and it was like everything was right in its spot. And you do get a little crazy that way. Anyway,
Did you have to filter most of your water?
All of my water.
All of your water? Okay.
Yeah, I use a Sawyer squeeze. Did you guys want to see that? I have it in the closet, but they're pretty cheap and they are amazing. So I take, you get a bag. It's a water bag that's for your dirty water. And you fill that in a stream or even a lake or whatever. And you screw on the squeeze. Now, I don't squeeze it anymore. On the PCT, I was squeezing it. You don't need to do that. You can make a line for it, hang it, and then you put your water bottle below it. There's actually a way to screw it on with a coupler. And you just leave it there. And in about 5 minutes, the water's filled. And there's actually a funny picture on my website. If you want to go to blissfulhiker.com, when my friend and I were in Scotland, we were gathering water in streams that were peat bogs. And so the water was the color of root beer and we filtered it and it was safe, but it was brown. And it's like, okay, this is what it is. It's not going to make it crystal clear. But it works, and it's clean enough. So yes, I always filter water. The only time in my life I have not filtered water was when Richard, my husband, and I went to Chile, and they said all those streams are clean, and you can drink right out of them. But I think that there still can be protozoa or bacteria in streams, and your trip's over if you get that sick, because sometimes it can last a couple of weeks. What were the worst excuses to work yourself through while you were hiking? How did I keep myself going, I think is what that question is. That's a great question. I think one of the hardest parts about doing something that's that long, even a 2-week trip, even the John Muir Trail, which I did very slowly in the first time, 21 days, you can't look at the end. You can't be thinking about the end. You have to think about the step you're taking. And it can become very, very hard. I was really lucky on the PCT because it was so beautiful. It always interested me. And I found ways to see things. I think taking pictures is really good. Blogging is really good because you have to frame your experience to tell other people. And if you take lots of pictures, sometimes it's not beautiful. You're in the middle of the woods forever. Hear that about the Appalachian Trail. Take lots of photos of things, photos of flowers, photos of fungus, write about your experience, try to make friends. I hiked alone for the most part, which can be hard because you have to get yourself up every day and you keep yourself moving. When I got to California, I ended up hiking with someone for pretty much all of Northern California. And it really helped because it started to get too long. It was just too many days. And you kept wanting to see the end. Oh, it's only 1,500 miles, till the end. I mean, you can't conceive of that. So to be with someone kept you moving. I think that was really helpful. And then at the end, a friend joined me for 200 miles at the end. And it was nice because it was like a change of pace to have a person that you were planning things with. But when you're alone, I don't know if you guys read in the newspaper this weekend, but an 86-year-old has just taken the record for finishing the Appalachian Trail. Can you imagine? 86 years old. He did not do it on a through hike. He did it in sections, but I mean, 86. My brother Andrew's here. Our mother can't walk right now. She uses a walker. So he was hiking, and he said that so much of it is mental. So much of it is just the attitude of if you need to take a break, take a break. There's nothing to prove. No one really cares how fast you went. I mean, unless you are an athlete and this is your, job, like, a guy interviewed, Gabe Joyce ran the Wind River High Route. It's 100 miles at high altitude with no trail in 47 hours. Okay, well, fine. Good for him. That's his job. That's what he does for a living. But for us, it's just, to go faster. Sometimes you feel like I've got to get there. And sometimes you just have to pull yourself back and say, stop, take a break. Go into town and have lunch. But then you have to be very careful about spending too much time, because sometimes you go into town and it's like, oh, let's just stay another day. And then it starts to drag on. And then you get that nervousness of going back to trail. So there's sometimes this relationship with it. And to really set yourself small goals. I'm going to see, like, one of my favorite days was I went over a pass called Glen Pass that was beautiful in the Sierra. And I came down and I thought the day is really gorgeous. And, it's getting colder and I'd really like to keep moving. If I get to, the part where you're down, then you're starting to go back up to the next pass before noon, then I'm going to go on. And I was just thinking that. I was like, okay, that's my goal. So I was like marching along, but yes, kind of slowed down. I wasn't like in a hurry. I was like, okay, if I get there, I do. If I don't, I don't. And all of a sudden I saw these 3 guys that were just doing the John Muir Trail that I'd met on the first day. And they were like, hey, Alison, how are you? What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. We have all this extra food. Do you want it? And I'm like, yes. They gave me all this extra food. And then they said, we're going over the pass. And I was like, oh, what time is it? And it was literally like 10 to noon. And we had hit the low part. And then suddenly it wasn't only that, it was like, oh, I guess I'm going to go on, but I had 3 friends to do it. So you started to feel a little safer. You know, it wasn't like you were just pushing yourself over this really dangerous pass. And it was really fun, you know. So small goals. I also wrote an article about the things I learned on, 10 things I learned on thru-hikes. And it's about patience and about, attitude, and they're things that you take into real life. And they're really important because this last year I had to replace both of my hips. Nothing to do with backpacking, to do with being badass. No, just being someone who it's just a genetic thing. I'm looking for this article, and it was Set Your Sights Low. That's one of my pieces. And it was kind of interesting to discover these sorts of attitude changing things that go into your life, and also the way you can take those kinds of things into your life too. Like you can turn it around and say, I'm working on a really big project. What would this be like if I was thru hiking? What really makes, somebody asked a question here, what drives you to do this level of trekking? And I usually answer that question by saying, when I walk, especially when I'm alone for a long time, it's the one time that I become so internal, and all of the busyness and all of the craziness and all of the comparisons and all of the challenges that we impose upon ourselves in life disappear. And I become much more about just the immediacy of the fact that I'm alive right now in this moment. And I know that sounds really ooey gooey, but let's face it. I mean, we're on this earth for such a short moment. And it's so hard to remember that in our lives. I mean, we have so many things coming at us at once, and so many expectations that we have to be perfect, or that we have to, do really well, be successful. And out there in nature, you suddenly become just this kind of entity passing through something that's been there for, a millennia and longer than that. This beautiful place that you're just gifted with. And I think it's hard for me in shorter trails to get into that space. It's after day after day after day, and maybe that's sleep and food deprivation, nutrition deprivation, and that puts me into an insane space. But I do begin talking to myself. I begin talking to the goddess, I call her, that's like my higher self. And I have a conversation with this woman who surprisingly has like the same voice as I do, talking back to me in a much calmer voice and saying, well, maybe you should think of it this way. I do love the challenge, the physical challenge. And I really love the way things change. I mean, as you saw in the PCT, the dramatic changes of landscape, and doing that all at once is really incredible to experience. I mean, even in Scotland, which was more the same terrain, I mean, you started to have this feeling of arriving somewhere. And that also becomes this kind of metaphor for life, and metaphor for any kind of project we do, or anything we throw our work at, our bodies at, our lives at, is a sense of arrival. A Walk in the Woods or Wild, best movie that is good on hiking. I mean, The Walk in the Woods is a terrible movie. I'm really sorry. I was hoping so much for it. I think it's one of the best books ever written. He's funny. It's Bill Bryson. If you guys don't know, Bill Bryson is not a hiker at all, but did 700 miles of the Appalachian Trail with his friend, who is a recovering alcoholic. And they had, someone asked earlier about characters. They had wild characters in the Appalachian Trail, and he gives really interesting information about it. And he's a brilliant writer. And I think it's a great book. Wild is quite different. That's Cheryl Strayed, who, it's more of a book of redemption, of finding herself again, which we can't fault. I mean, a lot of walking becomes that, is each step is this sort of, I'm stepping towards healing. I just did an interview for the podcast with a writer about vets who are using walking as healing, long distance trails in particular. And then I interviewed a triple crowner who's done all of the major hikes, PCT, AT, and CDT. After, several of his friends in his platoon were killed in Afghanistan, and one of his friends commits suicide. I mean, there's so much suicide in these vets who have returned because there's no sense of anything that they're supposed to do anymore. So walking becomes healing. And I think Wild's a great book. I think the movie was good. I think it's a lot better than A Walk in the Woods. But Reese Witherspoon just kind of the whole time is a little exhausting. Let's see. I saw that older dude. Outfitters for us rookies to have the experience with reduced penalty for mistakes. That's a great question. Such a good question. I think that you guys have the rovers where you can borrow equipment, and that is super important. If you can buy used equipment. I'm not sure Midwest has Thrifty, and I think they have a swap exchange. REI does used equipment. Maybe you have a good friend that you could borrow, a really ultralight tent, see what it feels like to be carrying and using the major gear, the ultralight. That would be a great way to get into it before you're spending the money, because it can be really expensive. The tent that I took on the PCT was almost $600. I thought it was too much. The one I have now, I don't do, it's called Cuban fiber. You know what I'm talking about. What's that stuff called? Dyneema material. It's the lightest, strongest material. I'm just going back to sil nylon, and I seem to be okay with it. So I have a tent, that's $300. I mean, that's a lot of money to put down if you're not sure you're going to be able to fit in it or sleep in it. So if you could borrow one from someone, just go to the Superior Hiking Trail for 4 days or something, in rain or in cold and like a miserable time, and try out a couple of those pieces of gear, and kind of see what you like. That would definitely be my suggestion. You may have already answered this. How often do you hike with others? Never. No. I am known as the solo middle-aged female titanium reinforced hiker. And I love hiking by myself. I did have a really difficult time in Montana because I developed SVT, which is an arrhythmia of the heart. And it got so bad in the high heat that I actually couldn't move anymore. I wasn't unable to breathe, and I had syncope where I was about to pass out. So I needed to come out. That's pretty dangerous. It's probably better to be with somebody, because if you did pass out, they're with you rather than, the grizzly bear finding you and having you as a snack. I think one of the things that's misunderstood is that when you are on these big trails, there are a lot of people on them, and you don't have as many days where you're all alone. It tends to be all alone as you get towards the end. Like, I didn't see very many people in Southern California at all. I'd have day after day after day camping alone. And that's when I started to feel like I was being watched by a mountain lion. But there were a lot of people, and it's the one thing is that a mistake I made this year in Montana is I planned to hike with people to start because of the grizzly country. And that wasn't necessarily a good idea, because they were much younger than me. They wanted to go faster. They had a very different attitude about hiking. They were not practicing 10 essential or leave no trace. And so it didn't work out. And so I ended up being alone. And in some ways you feel more alone when you're hiking with people that you shouldn't be with than when you're totally alone. So sometimes it's better to come and kind of get to know people as you're going. And one of the things that happened in Northern California is I hiked with this guy named Klaus. His English was good, but very, very basic. So we weren't really having these like deep conversations. It wasn't like a person I became best friends with. But it was a person I could say, okay, we're going to go here today. And we would kind of walk together, and you had a sense that you were making a plan, and it just made it a little more fun. So that was kind of cool for me, kind of alone, but kind of together. And then when I was in Scotland, I was with a friend, and it was fun because you have a friendship. So that's a whole other level. Any other questions? I just feel like I'm talking nonstop. Emergency shoes, gear. Everybody follow me at blissfulhiker.com. I write all kinds. I should put this link up to things I learned. Let me see if I can find it real fast. It's a little bit messy here. I think it's on page 2. 10 things I learned backpacking, because it's no, that's Montana. Because it's pretty, it gets into sort of the why of it. But I can't seem to find it. Anyway, I have two podcasts. I do the Blissful Hiker podcast, and I do Walking Distance, which is interviewing people about backpacking and interesting things. So like the next show that's coming up is a bear expert. He's a scientist, and he has really good, I can't find the article. Anyway, he has really, really good suggestions about how to manage bears that are dangerous. So grizzly bear, polar bear, and black bear can be dangerous too. There was an attack in Colorado this year by a black bear, and he kind of wipes out a lot of our assumptions about bears and about, altercations with wild animals, which is definitely a concern. I would say the thing I'm most scared about when I'm in the wild is lightning is very dangerous. You can always take it very seriously, especially if you're in high mountains like the Sierra or Colorado Rockies, Henny Rockies, anywhere that you're exposed, even here in the on Superior Hiking Trail. And falling now as I'm getting older, like really being careful. I always use walking sticks when I hike. Part of that is to set my tent, but also somebody sent me a direct message. Here's a link. Oh, thank you for putting that up, Melissa. And so I'm always really careful of that. I did fall in Scotland on mud, which it's really difficult to stop yourself with sticks when you slip on mud because you go backwards. But I must have come over and I whacked my head. But fortunately, my backpack hit first. But I had this like lump. If it was just a little bit lower, it could have taken me out. So someone said, did base camp Everest in 2014. Now, after 2 cancers, we'll do Mount Kilimanjaro in 2022. That is wonderful. That is a note that was a direct message, so I'm just going to say that's wonderful to hear that from you for going for it. And I will say that Kilimanjaro is on my list, but I'm not really great at high altitude, so I may have to just listen to your presentation when you give it after you return. Any other questions, guys? Thank you so much for letting me talk.
Thanks for doing it, Alison. You're the best.
Yay! Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
Awesome
Yes,
presentation.
thanks.